Welcome to our channel, where we bring you the most inspiring and life-changing stories. Today, you are about to hear a story that is not just about success. It is about struggle, pain, determination, and the power of never giving up. This is the story of a young boy who had nothing. Not a single penny, not a comfortable home, not even enough food to eat. A boy who lost everything at a young age, who had no one to help him, and who faced hunger, loneliness, and endless hardships. But that boy did not accept his fate. That boy refused to give up. He walked for 2 years, covering a distance of 470 kilometers, with no money, no food, and no shelter. He faced storms, hunger, and exhaustion, but he never stopped. That boy later became the founder of the world's most powerful luxury brand, Louis Vuitton. How did he do it? How did a homeless, hungry boy become the creator of a billion-dollar empire? How did he turn his pain into power and his struggles into success? Everything in this story is true. Every struggle, every success, and every detail. Watch the full story to truly understand the journey from nothing to ultimate luxury. Trust me, you won't regret it. This story isn't just inspiring. It's a powerful way to improve your English. With engaging storytelling, rich vocabulary, and real-life lessons, you'll learn naturally while enjoying an incredible journey. Now let's begin from the very start. In the year 1821, in a small village called Angers, France, a baby boy was born into a poor family. His name was Louis Vuitton, but life did not welcome him with comfort or wealth. From the moment he was born, he was surrounded by hardship. His father, Xavier Vuitton, was a carpenter, a hard-working man who built furniture and small wooden structures. His mother, Coronne Gaillard, was a hat maker who spent her days sewing hats for local women. They worked day and night, yet their earnings were barely enough to buy food. Louis grew up in a tiny wooden house with a leaking roof and cold, damp floors. Winters in Angers were brutal. Snow covered the village for months, and cold winds made life even harder. There was no heating, no warm blankets, and no comfortable bed. Louis and his family had to survive with whatever they had. At a young age, he learned that life was not fair. He did not have the toys that rich children had. He did not go to school like them. Instead, he spent his childhood helping his father in carpentry, carrying heavy wooden planks, hammering nails, and cleaning sawdust from the floor. His hands were rough, his clothes were torn, and his stomach often remained empty. But Louis was different from other children in his village. Even though he was poor, even though he had nothing, he had something that others did not. A dream. Every day, travelers passed through his village. Rich men and women dressed in fine clothes, carrying large wooden trunks and suitcases. Louis would watch them with fascination. Where were they going? How far were they traveling? Who made those beautiful trunks they carried? He had never seen the world beyond his small village, but his heart longed to know more. He was curious, hungry for knowledge, and desperate for a better life. But fate was not kind to him. When Louis was just 10 years old, his mother fell sick. There were no hospitals in the village, no doctors to treat her. Day by day, her condition worsened. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Louis's mother took her last breath. She was gone. Louis stood by her grave, silent, unable to cry. His world had fallen apart. His father, broken by grief, became distant and cold. He no longer had the strength to take care of Louis. For the first time, Louis felt completely alone. But in that moment of pain, he made a decision. He would not stay in this village forever. He would not accept a life of poverty. He would leave. He would chase his dream. But how? At the age of 13, Louis had no money, no horse, and no food. Paris, the city of dreams, was 470 kilometers away. It was impossible. Or was it? One evening, as the village prepared for sleep, Louis packed a small bag. He had no map, no guide, only a dream. He did not tell his father. He did not say goodbye to anyone. Before the sun could rise, before anyone could stop him, Louis took his first step on the long road to Paris. He did not know what lay ahead. He did not know how he would survive. But he knew one thing. He could not stop. He walked for hours, then days, then weeks. His feet were sore, his body weak. Sometimes kind strangers gave him food. Other times, he went to bed hungry, lying under trees, using his bag as a pillow. He crossed forests, mountains, and rivers. He worked as a farm helper in small villages, earning food in exchange for labor. Rain soaked his clothes, winter winds burned his skin, but he never turned back. He was tired. He was starving, but he was determined. After 2 years of walking, struggling, and surviving with nothing but determination, Louis Vuitton finally arrived in Paris. But Paris was not the magical place he had imagined. The city was massive, filled with thousands of people, carriages rushing through the streets, and markets overflowing with food and luxury goods. The air smelled of fresh bread, roasted coffee, and perfume. Things Louis had never experienced in his poor village. But there was also another side to Paris. The streets were dirty, packed with beggars, thieves, and struggling workers who barely made enough to eat. The reality was harsh. Paris was not a place that welcomed the poor. And Louis had nothing. No home, no family, no money. He stood at the edge of the city, exhausted, his clothes torn, his feet bleeding from the long journey. His stomach growled, but he had no food. For the first time in 2 years, fear crept into his heart. Where would he sleep? How would he survive? The first night in Paris was the hardest. Louis found an empty wooden cart abandoned near a bakery. He crawled inside, pulled his small bag close to his chest, and tried to sleep. The streets were noisy. People laughed, shouted, and horses clattered against the stone roads. Rats scurried around, searching for food, but Louis was too tired to care. He closed his eyes, ignoring the cold wind biting his skin. The next morning, hunger forced him to wake up early. He watched as well-dressed men and women entered bakeries, buying golden loaves of bread and buttery croissants. The smell made his stomach twist in pain. He had no choice. He needed work. Louis walked from shop to shop asking for a job, but every time the answer was the same. No experience, no work, no connections, no chance, no money, no food. Paris was cruel to those who had nothing. Days passed, and Louis grew weaker. He ate scraps from the market, picking up leftover bread from the ground when no one was looking. His body ached. His clothes were dirty. He had never felt so alone. But he refused to give up. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Louis noticed a man struggling to carry a large wooden trunk into a shop. The man was sweating, his hands shaking from the weight. Without thinking, Louis ran forward and grabbed the other side of the trunk. The man looked at him in surprise but said nothing. Together, they lifted the trunk inside. The shop was unlike anything Louis had ever seen. Wooden trunks of all shapes and sizes lined the walls, some covered in leather, others decorated with brass locks and golden initials. It was a workshop, one of the finest in Paris. The owner of the shop, Monsieur Maréchal, watched Louis with sharp eyes. "You're strong for a boy your size," he said. "What's your name?" "Louis Vuitton, sir? What do you want?" Louis took a deep breath. This was his chance. "I want to work." Maréchal raised an eyebrow. "Can you make trunks?" Louis hesitated. "No, sir, but I can learn." The old man chuckled. "Everyone says that, but not everyone is willing to do the hard work." Louis's stomach clenched. He had come too far to be rejected again. "Give me a chance," he said, his voice firm. "I will work harder than anyone else." There was silence. Then Maréchal nodded. "Fine. You start tomorrow. But don't expect money yet. You work, you learn, and if you're good, then we'll talk about payment." Louis bowed. "Thank you, sir." He had done it. He had found a place to work. But this was only the beginning. The next morning, Louis arrived before sunrise. The workshop was freezing. The scent of fresh wood and glue filled the air. Tools were scattered across wooden tables: hammers, saws, chisels, and needles for stitching leather. Louis was assigned to sweep the floor, fetch tools, and clean up after the workers. At first, he didn't mind. He was just happy to be inside, away from the cold streets. But weeks passed, and he was still only doing basic tasks. He wanted to build. He wanted to create. One evening, after everyone had left, Louis stayed behind. He picked up a small wooden panel and began practicing. He hammered, carved, and stitched, imitating the work he had seen during the day. The next morning, Maréchal noticed the piece. He lifted it, examining the clean edges and precise stitches. "Did you make this?" he asked. Louis nodded, nervous. Maréchal didn't smile, but he didn't scold him either. "From now on, you stay after work. I'll teach you." That night, Louis worked harder than ever. He learned how to shape wood, how to select the best leather, how to stitch with perfection. He watched the master craftsmen memorizing their every move. Months turned into years. He was no longer just an apprentice. He was becoming a craftsman, and people started to notice. By the time Louis was 20 years old, his hands were no longer those of a poor village boy. They were the hands of a skilled artisan. He was faster than the other workers, more precise in his craftsmanship, and more creative with his designs. Nobles and wealthy customers began requesting him by name. "I want my trunk made by Vuitton." "That boy makes the finest trunks in Paris." His reputation grew. He was no longer just a poor worker. He was someone valuable. One day, a woman entered the shop. She was elegant, wearing a luxurious silk gown and a pearl necklace. But it was her name that changed everything. She was Empress Eugénie, the wife of Napoleon III, the ruler of France. She was not just another wealthy customer. She was royalty. Her silk gown shimmered under the golden chandeliers of the workshop. Her diamond earrings sparkled as she glanced around, unimpressed by the ordinary trunks lining the walls. But when her gaze fell upon Louis, her sharp eyes narrowed. "Are you the young craftsman they call Vuitton?" she asked, her voice smooth but commanding. Louis swallowed hard. He had worked for years, perfecting his skills, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. "Yes, Your Majesty," he replied, bowing slightly. She studied him for a moment, then turned to Monsieur Maréchal, the workshop's owner. "I need a trunk, but not just any trunk," she said. "I travel often, and my trunks are too heavy, too impractical. I want something elegant yet functional, something no one has ever seen before." Louis's mind raced. This was his chance. If he impressed the Empress, his name would spread through the entire country. But if he failed, he would lose everything. Louis had seen the problems with traditional trunks. Back then, travel trunks were bulky, round-topped, and difficult to stack. They were covered in thick leather, making them heavy and impractical. Most importantly, they were not designed for modern travel. But Louis had an idea, something that had never been done before. He stepped forward, his hands slightly trembling. "Your Majesty, what if I create a trunk that is light, elegant, and stackable?" he said. "A flat-topped trunk, covered in waterproof canvas instead of leather. It will be durable, easy to carry, and perfect for your travels." Silence filled the room. Marechal looked at Louis as if he had lost his mind. No one had ever dared to change the traditional design of a trunk. But Empress Eugénie tilted her head, intrigued. "A flat-topped trunk? Canvas instead of leather?" she repeated. "That is interesting. Can you do it?" Louis's heart pounded. "Yes, Your Majesty. I will create a trunk unlike any other." A small smile played on her lips. "Then do it, Vuitton. Impress me." For weeks, Louis worked day and night. He knew this was his moment to prove himself, not just to the Empress, but to the entire world. First, he designed the frame. Instead of using the usual thick, heavy wood, he chose poplar wood, which was lightweight yet strong. Next, he replaced the traditional rounded top with a flat surface. This simple change allowed trunks to be stacked neatly, making them perfect for long journeys. But the biggest innovation was the material. Instead of using leather, Louis experimented with a waterproof try-on canvas, a light gray, durable fabric that resisted moisture and stains. It was unlike anything seen before. Days turned into weeks. Louis barely slept. His hands were covered in cuts and glue. He skipped meals, too focused on making the perfect trunk. When the final piece was ready, it was breathtaking. The canvas shimmered under the light, smooth and elegant. The brass locks gleamed, securing the trunk tightly. The craftsmanship was flawless. It was not just a trunk. It was a masterpiece. The day of the presentation arrived. Louis stood in the grand hall of the Empress's palace, his heart pounding. Nobles and high-ranking officials whispered as they glanced at him, unimpressed by the young craftsman in simple clothes. The Empress entered, her gown flowing behind her like water. Her eyes fell on the trunk. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she reached out, running her fingers over the smooth canvas. She inspected the locks, the stitching, the finish. Everyone held their breath. Finally, she looked at Louis. "Vuitton," she said, "this is extraordinary." Murmurs spread through the room. Marechal, who had once doubted Louis, stared in shock. "From now on," the Empress continued, "you will be my personal trunk maker." It was done. Louis had won the trust of the most powerful woman in France. And in that moment, everything changed. The Empress's endorsement was more than just an honor. It was an opportunity. Suddenly, the elite of Paris wanted Vuitton trunks. Aristocrats, politicians, and wealthy travelers all placed orders. But there was a problem. Louis was still just a worker in Marechal's shop. No matter how talented he was, he would always be under someone else's control. He needed to break free. So, after years of loyalty, Louis made the boldest decision of his life. He left the workshop and started his own business. With the little money he had saved, about $1,000 in today's value, he rented a small space in Paris. The shop was modest, with only a few tools and a single workbench, but it was his. He hung a wooden sign outside: Louis Vuitton, Malatier, trunk maker. It was official. He was no longer just a poor village boy. He was a business owner. Starting a business was not easy. The first few months were brutal. Louis had no employees, no big factory, no safety net. Every trunk he made was handcrafted by him alone. He worked from sunrise to midnight, barely stopping to eat. And then, disaster struck. A massive war broke out in France. The Franco-Prussian War. The streets of Paris turned into battlefields. Wealthy customers fled the city, factories shut down, businesses collapsed. Suddenly, no one was buying luxury goods. Louis's shop, which had been growing, now stood empty. The orders stopped. The money stopped. He was on the edge of bankruptcy. For months, he fought to keep his business alive. He sold some of his tools, cut down on materials, and worked harder than ever. But no matter how much he tried, he was running out of time. If things didn't change soon, he would lose everything he had built. Then, just when all hope seemed lost, something unexpected happened. The war ended. And when peace returned, a new era began. People wanted to travel again. They wanted style, elegance, and innovation. And they wanted Louis Vuitton trunks. Orders flooded in. His shop, which had been nearly abandoned, suddenly became the most talked-about business in Paris. But Louis didn't just rebuild, he expanded. In 1871, he opened a brand new workshop in Agnières, just outside Paris. It was 4 times bigger than his old shop. He hired workers, trained apprentices, and designed new collections. His dream was no longer just a shop. It was an empire in the making. But the world was changing fast. Luxury was no longer just for royalty. It was for the rising elite. While Louis was building his empire in the 80s, his personal life was also changing. He married Clémence Émilie Pariot, a strong and supportive woman who believed in his dreams. She was not just his wife. She was his partner. They had a son, Georges Vuitton, who later expanded the business. But success came at a cost. Louis, obsessed with perfection, spent endless nights in his workshop, barely seeing his family. He missed birthdays, gatherings, and quiet evenings, all while chasing his dream. From the very beginning, Louis understood something most businessmen didn't. If you want to create a lasting brand, you must sell to the rich. But why? The wealthy had power. They influenced fashion, trends, and the desires of society. If aristocrats and high-status travelers used Vuitton trunks, everyone else would dream of owning one too. And there was another reason. Rich customers did not argue about price. They only cared about exclusivity. Louis never tried to sell to the masses. He focused on a few elite clients who were willing to pay top dollar for something unique and handcrafted. This strategy worked like magic. Soon, not only nobles, but also bankers, businessmen, and world travelers started ordering Vuitton trunks. Owning a Louis Vuitton trunk was no longer just about travel. It was a status symbol. Louis Vuitton had built an empire, but his journey ended in 1892 when he passed away, leaving his son, Georges Vuitton, in charge. Before passing away, Louis called Georges to his side and gave him one final lesson. Never sell cheap, never sell to the masses. Our name must always stand for the best. If the world changes, we must change with it, but never lose what makes us special. Georges was young, ambitious, and determined to take his father's vision to new heights. He expanded Louis Vuitton beyond travel trunks, introducing handbags, cutlery bags, and luxury minibars that changed the world of high fashion. As his business grew, copycats appeared. Cheap imitations of his designs started flooding the market. Customers were being tricked into buying fake Vuitton trunks. Louis knew he had to protect his brand. He introduced the LV monogram in 1896 to stop counterfeits, making Louis Vuitton a name that only the wealthy could afford. Under Georges, the brand didn't just survive, it dominated the luxury market. But nothing lasts forever. Georges was aging. The empire was growing too big for one man. The world was changing fast. Automobiles, airplanes, and a new era of fashion were emerging. For decades, Georges had worked endlessly to expand the Louis Vuitton brand. He introduced leather handbags and accessories that became a status symbol. He opened stores internationally, making Louis Vuitton a global name. He protected the brand's exclusivity, ensuring that LV remained a luxury reserved